just go step way back to some big picture things to start out with. And that is, in the Christian church, there is a huge spectrum of how people see God's activity in the world. And so there's some way over on one side of the church that would basically say, you know what, those miracles, God talking to people, they never actually happened. They were just sort of some mythology that help us to hear the message and believe the basic ideas taught by God. There's some more in the middle that would say, and the technical word for this would be cessationists. There are lots of people in the middle that would say, you know what, yep, God did miracles through Moses and the prophets in the Old Testament, and God did miracles through Jesus, and God did amazing things in the early church, but the whole point of those things was just until the Bible got written down. So cessationists would say, you know what, God stopped doing all those things as soon as the last part of the Bible was finally written down, because now we don't need God's presence, we just need the book to read and study. If you notice the way I talked about things, I don't fit in either of those categories. And my whole point of my sabbatical would not make sense if either of those categories were true. Because the point of my sabbatical was to go and look, where did Jesus and where did God keep showing up after the Bible was written in the history of the church to transform people and communities to continue spreading God's kingdom into the world. So what I want to encourage us to look at during this series is that we are to expect to live normal Christianity. And normal Christianity is based on expecting God to keep talking. Normal Christianity is expecting God's presence and God's activity to continue to happen, not to just believe the ideas or to believe that God used to do things in the past, but to trust that God can still transform individuals and communities today. So that's probably a long introduction to where I want to go. But one of the places that I explored, and my family, because of a Lily grant, got to go with me, to start exploring where normal Christianity broke out back in the thing is, basically I looked at three main movements in church history where God just showed up in powerful ways. Did you know that two of these three happened in Lutheran churches? I just want to let you know that revival historically can happen in Lutheran communities. I just want to encourage you to think about that. The first one was a Lutheran community in Germany. And so I'm just going to spend a few weeks talking about this group called the Moravians. And hopefully in a week or two there'll be a little booklet where if you want to read some of the same stuff I'm talking about, you'll have a chance to do that. But the Moravians, I want to focus on the guy who ended up making the possibility of the Moravian community. And his name was, if you want to go to the next one, there's the guy. If we go to Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. And he was a Lutheran. I just want to keep telling you, these things are happening with Lutherans. And so Zinzendorf was someone who you'd think, well, he's nobility. And since you're nobility, life is supposed to always be easy. But Zinzendorf didn't necessarily have an easy life. As a matter of fact, as he was born and becoming an infant, his father was dying. And so basically his father just had enough time to bless him before the father died. The mother would end up remarried, and as she remarried, the mother and the father-in-law basically said, you know what, we really don't want to raise him. We're going to send him off to go and live with grandma. But as a matter of fact, that was actually setting him up for something that would prepare him for what would put him in a place where God would use him in powerful ways, because there were things happening at grandma's household. That there was, you know, go to the next slide. And once again, this is still within Lutheranism. This isn't like splits happening. But within Lutheranism, there was sort of a renewal movement happening during this time called the Pietistic movement. And the Pietistic movement was started by a guy named Spener, who wrote a book called Pia Desideria, which means pious desires. And basically he was, and this was like 100 years into Lutheranism, he was already thinking, you know what, we're missing out on something. The church is becoming dry. We need to start focusing on not just head knowledge and ritual. We need to focus on heart experience of God. We need to focus on more than just church on Sunday morning. We need to support one another to live out the Christian faith 7 days a week. So that was what the Pietists were thinking of bringing renewal within the Lutheran church. So once again, Lutheran guy. So what ends up happening, well, first I want to have you share with me, when you hear the word pietist, do you get a nice warm feeling usually, or do you tend to think of people that are pretty stuffy? I mean, just religious, stuffy people. But do you think that that is the origin of pietism? No, we look at pietists and think, well, they're just all trying to be religious all the time. They're just doing all these nice things and studying the Bible and trying to be religious. But that wasn't the origin of pietism. The origin of pietism was people that had such an experience of Christian community and God's love that they wanted to pray all the time. They wanted to worship all the time. They wanted to go out and see how faith affected every area of life. So I just want to bring us back to the origin of pietism and not where you look back and see, well, that just caused them to be busy doing Christian stuff all the time. The origin was from the heart, not from the behavior. So there was these two streams in the Lutheran Church. One of them, if you go to the next one, just a little more information. The pietistic movement, the thing that made it so significant that Zinzendorf was growing up in his grandma's household, was that a lot of the pietistic, because they wanted to talk about faith, how it affects every aspect of life, the pietists liked getting together in small groups to worship and pray together. And so where do you think was one of the main meeting groups for the pietists? Grandma's house. So Zinzendorf was surrounded by this whole atmosphere of people who were like the head of the pietistic movement of the time. And so he saw that that was just a normal way to live your life, was an experience of God's presence and having faith affect every aspect of life. And so as he was sent off to boarding school at age 10, the leader of the boarding school was one of the main movers and shakers of pietism of that day, August Hermann Franke, and he was also a Lutheran, so just want to remind you. Franke, though, Mom, I don't think was necessarily that helpful with Zinzendorf, first sending him to go live with Grandma. And apparently Mom also was concerned about her son when he went to boarding school. So he went to boarding school, Mom went and told Franke and the other teachers, you know, my son has this tendency to be arrogant and conceited. Make sure that you're extra hard on him. And so they were. And not only were they hard on him because of what Mom said, but he was also sort of a wimpy little kid, and he ended up getting picked on. So school wasn't necessarily easy early on, but because he was so gifted and so intelligent, he ended up rising above it so that he ended really well at college. And because he was nobility, he got to sit at the table with Spener, or with Franke, and he got to sit at the table when all the visiting people were coming through the school. So he was there to listen to all these leaders in the church. He was there to listen when missionaries would come back and talk about what was going on. And as a matter of fact, the pietists were really the only ones who were even thinking about mission in the Lutheran community at that time. So he had all of this Christian community, prayer, had this sense of world missions already being planted in him while he was in Halle. But he also, because when you're with a group of people who are pietists who see normal Christianity being lived out 7 days a week, where you got together in Christian community to support each other, what do you think he and some of the other boys at the pietist school did? They got together to support each other, to encourage each other in the faith. So he and some friends formed this little small group, and they decided we are going to help to support each other, to live out our faith fully, to honor God, and to be a blessing in the world. And so they called their group at one point the Slaves of Virtue. They thought that was a little bit harsh. They called it the Confessors of Christ. And later on, they're going to change the name, but not yet. At Halle, what's happening now is Zinzendorf, who basically starts out with a challenging time, by the time that he's done there, he and his friends have basically sparked a little revival in the school. And so it's getting Franke's attention, and Franke actually likes him by the time he leaves. But whenever there's different streams in the church, do you think sometimes there gets to be sort of a jealousy that, you know what, he's going to be a nobility in a certain area, and we don't want him to just be a pietist. We want him to know how to relate to the whole Lutheran community. So we can't have him keep studying at Halle because then he'll just hang out with the pietists. So what they say is his parents decide now he needs to go to Wittenberg. So we go to the next picture. He goes to Wittenberg where he's going to study and where he won't necessarily be pigeonholed as just being a pietist that way because he's part of a bigger community. But he gets to Wittenberg, and do you think he all of a sudden stops valuing Christian community? No, he just doesn't necessarily find it there. So what he does is he stays in communication through letters with his friends from Halle. And they decide we're going to keep on, making each other accountable to our Christian faith. But now what they're going to do is, well, we're not together in a community, so what image is it that can describe who we are, where we're just sort of scattered around, seemingly insignificant as individuals, but yet individually we want to support each other to really grow and be a blessing where we are? What image from the Bible that Jesus shared about insignificant little things becoming bigger? The mustard seed. So they decide that's going to describe our community. We're not together, but wherever we are planted, we're going to be significant because we're supporting each other. And what they decide to do, if you go to the next picture, is to basically say, based on their pietist values, we are going to keep each other accountable to living a life fully 7 days a week wherever we are, and we're going to keep each other accountable to being true to Christ. Whenever there's temptations to try to please people, we're going to choose whatever is necessary to serve Christ. And we're going to keep each other accountable to that. And we also value community. So we are going to make sure that we are loving and caring to all people. And if we see each other not doing that, we're going to keep each other accountable. And finally they decide, and because they've been influenced by some of the missions from the pietists, that we are going to not just focus on our own relationship with God and our own Christian community, but we're going to try to make an impact in the world with people that don't know about Jesus. So what does that sort of look like in our church mission statement? We are going to live upward, faithful to Christ. We're going to live inward in Christian community. And we're going to live outward, trying to make a difference and impact in the world. And that was just part of their pietistic background, those were the values. And they realized that they needed each other. So what ends up happening is he finishes his school in Wittenberg, and as with a lot of graduating students, especially in Europe, what do they tend to do after they graduate from school? They take a gap year. And a gap year is basically to go and travel around and have that experience before you get serious with whatever your life job is going to be. So Zinzendorf, because he's nobility, he has the money to go and travel. But it's interesting because as he begins his gap year, he goes to a museum in Düsseldorf. And the thing is that Zinzendorf is sort of an artistic type guy. That's just his background. He's someone who is interested in poetry and art and music. And so God's not going to get his attention through some in-depth Bible study. But God is going to get his attention through the way he's wired. And that is going to be through a museum. So what's going to happen is, if you go to the next picture, he's going to go to this museum and he's going to look at this picture. It's called Ecce Homo, which is Behold the Man. And basically it's from where Pilate is questioning Jesus when Jesus has been arrested. And he puts the crown of thorns on Jesus' head and brings him out and says, Behold, this is the man that you have called me to kill. And so what happens is that Zinzendorf is going to have the most powerful spiritual experience of his life up until what's going to happen in the Lutheran church later, where he's basically just starts looking at this picture and he's going to spend over an hour just completely enraptured by this picture. He's going to have this encounter of Jesus. And as he has this encounter, he really strongly feels Jesus talking to him saying, I've suffered for you, now what will you do for me? So he's going to have this, he's a Lutheran, he's having a powerful spiritual encounter. I'll let you know that can happen. But what ends up happening is he decides when he finishes his time in that museum is, normally gap year should just be a time for frivolity and fun. And he says, you know what, I'm not going to just have fun in my gap year, I'm going to actually try to evangelize as I travel. So what he ends up doing is, he will, wherever he goes, he's going to invite people to be part of his Order of the Mustard Seed. And there's going to be people all over the world by the time he's done. He's going to have a Catholic archbishop in France, he's going to have nobility in Denmark, he's going to have a Creek Indian chief in Georgia. He's going to have people from all different backgrounds. And the thing that's interesting is he's made this commitment to be kind to all people and true to Christ. And during that day and age, there was not such thing as ecumenism yet. Ecumenism being different streams of the church wanting to work together. They'd been so busy fighting with each other up to that point that Zinzendorf goes around and he values the heart religion. And he values the relationship that people have with Jesus. So he'll go and meet a Catholic and he'll say, I mean, we're supposed to not like each other, but we have the same heart for Christ, so we can love each other. And he'll go and meet Reformed people and find out, you know what, we're not supposed to get along with each other, but we have the same heart religion. And he's going to become the father of ecumenism, because he's going to focus on and he's going to end up trying to bring people together wherever he goes, to say that we're all part of the body of Christ. So as he finishes his gap year, he will have spread the good news of the word of the mustard seed of Jesus where he's traveled. He will have met the woman who will be his wife, Erdmuth, and they will get married. And they're going to buy out, or they're going to move into a house. And do you know whose house they're going to move into? Grandma's house. So they're going to go to Grandma. Put it on the next picture. Grandma's house, just to show you where it's at. It's way over where that red arrow is. At that point, there is no Herrenhut yet. All there is Berthelsdorf. And Berthelsdorf is where Grandma's house is. If you go to the next picture. That's where the house was in Berthelsdorf. Nice. So basically what they do is they move there. He is the count of that area. He's the leader of that area. And as the leader, he gets to appoint the Lutheran pastor in the Lutheran church in town. So if you want to go to the next picture, there's the Lutheran church inside in Berthelsdorf. And so because of his values as a leader, even though he was a lawyer technically, he was always interested in the church. So he wanted to make sure that the community he lived in was a Christian community, that not just in name, but the way they lived with each other. It's going to be interesting to see who will end up becoming this community that he and his wife want to have grow. And so just our last little point today, before next week we're going to see more about these people that are moving in. But there's a guy named Christian David, who is a carpenter, and he also has had sort of an experience of revival in his own life where he's starting to go out and be an evangelist. And so Christian David is going and he's meeting all these people. He's traveling down into what's now the Czech Republic, which is just south of just a few miles south of where Berthelsdorf is. And he's meeting these people who are basically religious refugees. Because in that day and age, you had to be whatever the religion of the area was. And they were Protestants. They were Protestants before Luther. And so now they're living in Catholic territory. They can't worship freely. So Christian David is saying, you know what, I think that there's a guy up here in Germany who's going to let you live on his estate. So Christian David ends up asking Zinzendorf and says, if I were to invite these people, would you allow them to stay if they came up here? And he had these values that said, I'm going to be true to Christ, and I'm going to be kind to all people. And how do you think he decided he needed to respond to that request? Of course, if they move here, they get to stay. But he basically had two requirements. And the first requirement was they needed to be escaping some sort of religious persecution. And the second was, if they come here, we want to have unity, we want to all worship together. So you need to worship with us in the Lutheran church. But otherwise, you're welcome to come. And we're going to see that community with Zinzendorf, the way he's been shaped by the Pietists, and now some history we're going to talk about from this group, which will be the Bohemian Brethren, how when those two things come together, there's going to be an explosion in this Lutheran church in Germany, where the greatest revival of the day is going to happen in a Lutheran church. And we're going to talk about that next week a little bit more. But with all the history now, so what is the whole point of this sermon series? Is it just to be learning history? No, it's going to actually be thinking, what can we learn? That if God wants to be active in and through communities and individuals, what can we learn by studying the people where God did show up in powerful ways? So I want to just invite us to be thinking about sort of the baseline this week. That what's the baseline of where we're at as a congregation, of where you're at individually? And to look at those three directions that are our mission statement. That we are to be true to Christ, living life upward in prayer and worship. And be thinking, are there ways we can grow in that way, in our prayer and our worship? Are there ways that you can grow in your own life of prayer and worship? And the second point, and this was something that was really important to the Pietists, and it will be to the Moravians, and that is that you don't live your relationship with God as an individual, but you live your relationship with God as a community of other people. So, living life inward in Christian community Where are we at that as a congregation? Are we providing people opportunities to live inwardly and have accountability with each other so that we can help each other to live life 7 days a week honoring Christ? And so where are you in that personally? Are you creating space or making intentional efforts to get together with other people to share your Christian life? And I'm trying to do something concrete each time from what I'm talking about. So this past week I contacted about 5 other pastors of every different denomination here in Yukon and just said, I'd like to find some people to get together with just to share life with, to pray with, and I've gotten some very enthusiastic responses. So for my own life, I need that, to just learn how to get together with other parts of the body of Christ and be accountable and receive prayer and support. So is God calling you to find some more intentional ways to connect? And then finally, to spread the gospel. That was the third part of the order of the mustard seed. As a congregation, are we connecting with our community? Are we connecting with the world? Or are we just focused on getting together for potlucks and having Sunday worship? And are you, in your life, are you finding ways to use your gifts to be a blessing outside of the walls of the church building? So this is our baseline today, is to see where are we starting, and then where can we learn from church history, even among Lutherans, how we can be available for God. And what we're going to find out, finally, and I realize this is getting long, we're going to find out is, finally, the best way that we'll live upward, inward, and outward is not by having the discipline to do it, but what we're going to discover is the answer is to have the relationship with God is going to end up causing